So this is Martin's house. And the reason it's called that is because the structure is named after somebody called Martin Munro. And he was a resident and he was born there in 1858. And he lived in this house until he retired in 1917. Now, what I love about this house while you're walking around it, it's known as a longhouse. It's the tenant longhouse. And it's a traditional longhouse where farming tenants and their livestock lived together under a single roof. And it was separated by a timber screen inside the byre section. I love these beds. How they're all built in and they're so close together and they've got the potties under the bed. But they didn't have running water back then and central heating and everything, but they only had quite basic things, really, the poor people, but it was cosy. And as I was walking around this, I thought, I love this house. I could actually live in a house like this. Have you seen how thick the walls are? So thick. And yet I lived in a bothy on the Isle of Ling and it had walls this thick, and yet it was quite cold sometimes. You'd expect it to be quite warm, but I don't know if this was, but you can see the fire there. That's where they got the heat and they would have cooked on at the same time. Stone floors, it would have been quite cold, wouldn't it? And imagine in winter, quite muddy on the floor, dragging all that inside. But they've got the broom there, which would have swept all the dust up and everything. But you're going into the barn area where they'll have kept the horse, and they all live together in the same house kind of thing. But I find it really cool. I mean, you can see that they did everything for themselves back then. Everybody had their own little job and everybody had their own skill sets. But this was one of the houses I liked the most. It felt quite big, really. Even though, I don't know, would you say in modern times it's considered small? I would say that was quite a big house. Now, it doesn't say how many people lived in it. It just says that he had 2 horses, Polly and Rona, right up until 1961. But I presume he lived there with a family. I think this would have been seen as quite a well-off house. Not exactly poor, I wouldn't say. Very homely and comfortable. Very basic, but the furniture that they had back then, they'll have had for many, many years. They wouldn't have replaced it often. And the beds were all made out of timber and built into the wall on a timber frame. But looking at the beds, I'd say there was probably, well, at least 4 people in that house. But if they were sharing a bed, maybe possibly 8. So now we are on to Eddie's house. And that was a nickname given to it. It's a traditional 19th century longhouse, so this is similar to Martin's house. And it was home to 3 generations of the McCallum family, including Eddie McCallum, the township's last tenant farmer, who lived there until 1954 before moving into a newer prefab home. So it was built around 1829 using stonework from an earlier structure on a site mapped back as far as 1789. So the structure, again, a classic Highland longhouse combining living quarters and an adjoining animal byre under one roof. And you can see here where they had their everything going on. But look how thick the walls are. And everything is just so simple, and yet it worked, didn't it? And look at all the fire. That would have been quite hot when they were cooking. They'll have had the heat on. But I noticed there's quite a lot of damp in these places because they wouldn't have had like the proper structure to keep the damp out. But was it damp when they lived there, or is it just damp now because no one's there anymore? I don't know. But I've just seen the mangle there. I love the mangles. But the sink there, that was great as well. But these rooms, it says it consisted of a best room and then a central closet used by the housekeeper and a kitchen directly next to the cow byre. So the McCallums, Eddie McCallum lived here with his wife Peggy, otherwise known as Margaret Cuthbertson, and they raised their family, including their young son Eddie. So in 1937, after neighbours moved away, Eddie became the last Gaelic speaker in the township. And a portion of a well-thumbed Gaelic Bible was later found wedged into the kitchen wall alongside a 1937 newspaper, likely used for insulation. So daily routines outside features a historic outdoor wash boiler used by Peggy to heat water for laundry and paired with an old mangle. A sunken barrel by the byre door was historically used for collecting liquid manure or fertiliser for the garden. And it was condemned in 1953. The local authorities deemed the longhouse unfit after modern housing standards. So relocation, the Argyll estate built a modern timber replacement house nearby where the family lived from 1954 until they left the tenancy in 1963. The structure is now preserved as part of the Highland Farm Museum, representing the end of communal joint tenancy farming life in the Scottish Highlands. So what do you think to this house? Again, very similar to Martin's, but what a beautiful location. Absolutely stunning. I really loved this one. So now we are onto the bow tent, which were traditional tents constructed using flexible bent hazel rods that were driven into the ground to form a domed frame, and then they were covered in waterproof canvas. And the people who lived in these were the gypsy travellers, and they travelled to Scottish farms like this place to perform seasonal agricultural work such as potato farming, and they would stay there in exchange for a place to stay, food and modest pay. So that is the place called Ardchindrain Township, and it's the last surviving and best preserved Highland Farm township in the world, located 6 miles south of Inverary in Argyll, Scotland. It's 22 acres and it's an open-air museum representing communal tenancy, farming community, and that has survived largely unchanged from the Middle Ages until the 1960s. Thank you for watching.